Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel with my very messy room, which we're not going to comment on because it's no one's fucking business. I wanted to do a live talking about some topics that have come up recently, especially on TikTok. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding the 20% rule pertaining to equestrians and um, whether or not that's valid. And there's been some pretty high profile accounts, including Raleigh Link, that have weighed in on this issue and talked about it. And I wanted to do a topic on it because I think that the nature in which people discuss this type of issue is problematic, and it perpetuates body policing and body shaming. And I just wanted to go into that a little bit because I think it's an important topic for people to consider, especially when they're presenting something that isn't overly well researched and portraying it as fact. Because there are way too many variables when it comes to riding horses to just have like a hard rule that where you're like, oh, if you're above 20% of your horse's weight, you are destroying them, don't ride them. And I just wanted to go into that a little bit, especially like the one commentary that I want to make right from the get-go about this is that body policing in the horse world disproportionately is directed at women and female presenting people. What I mean by this is a man who literally weighs the same as a woman that is being criticized for being too big for her horse is far less likely to be criticized for the same thing, even if he's on a smaller horse. Let's look at all the guys in the Western world who are riding with heavy tack and who are large men. I looked up the average weight of a man in US and it's 196.9 or 197.9, so almost 200 pounds. If you had a woman of the same size doing the exact same things, she would be way more likely to meet criticism for that. And this is part of the problem with this type of issue that we need to talk about is that it results in people just body shaming and body policing people simply off of how they look. They'll look at a video of them riding and they'll think to them the person looks like they're above the 20% rule, despite not knowing the weight of the person or the horse. And then they use that to criticize the person and perpetuate problems. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because even within the 20% rule, I think it's dangerous on either side because it can be used to justify riding horses in instances where the rider might be within the 20% rule, but is still technically too big for the horse to be carrying. Or it can be used to justify not having people ride when they have horses that are perfectly able to carry them just because they're a little bit over. So basically what I wanted to talk about is that there's a few things that people need to consider pertaining to weight that will change the impact a weight has on a horse. The first of which to consider is the fact that fitness plays a huge role, fitness of both horse and rider. If you have a horse who's very unfit and has no top line, they're going to struggle to carry weight regardless of how light it is. It'll be way more difficult for them to lift their core and use their back with a rider, even if they're only like 10 to 15% of their weight or less. This is also why it's a good idea to start doing groundwork with horses at first to build that top line and to start to get them fit before asking them to pack weight. But with this in mind, we have to consider fitness when we're talking about any type of weight rule with horses, fitness of both horse and rider. Because if the horse is not fit, it doesn't really matter if the rider is within a perceived weight rule if they are not prepared to pack weight and carry weight and have a strong top line. Also, additionally, experience and fitness of the rider will change the impact they have on the horse. So if you were comparing a rider who is 10% of the horse's weight, but is a new rider, incredibly unbalanced and doesn't know how to ride very well yet, to someone who is 25% of the horse's weight, but is a very accomplished rider who is fit to ride and has a good seat, knows how to ride. The damage that could be done by the smaller rider is more than what people would think. They're not going to do less harm to the horse in the long run simply because they are smaller, just because of their weight. You know, if they're a green rider, they're going to bounce around on the horse's back more and they can do more damage. This is also why it's so important to teach horses how to carry themselves better. So I wanted to caution people in using this rule to police other people's actions because, first of all, it lets any slender, thin presenting rider off the hook for considering that perhaps their weight could induce pain in their horse because it puts all the fixation on people who appeared heavier in anyone's eyes. And this is such a huge scale of different opinions that can occur because what one person might view as heavy could be entirely tied to the societal norms where they've been brought up, what their parents think, how they've been raised, and they could view someone who is an average weight to be too heavy. And then they could be policing their weight and whether or not they should ride based off of those biases. So this is why we don't want to like, we can't set this as like a firm rule when it's not well researched enough, because in order to actually have a full topic on whether or not this is a valid rule to like have as like the hard evidence is like do not ever exceed 20% of the horse's weight, we need to compare riders of different fitness levels, we need to compare horses of different fitness levels, we need to compare different breeds, we need to compare different sizes of riders, we need to compare different tack. We need to compare the impact of poorly fitting saddles, the impact of well-fitting saddles, the impact of green riders versus experienced riders, and so on and so forth. There are too many variables just to bring it down to weight, because the weight of someone can differ in its impact on an animal or even a surface depending on how they sit. For example, I only weigh 120 pounds. I have broken chairs before by sitting on them because I'll just thump into them too quickly all at once. The chairs are rated for above my weight class, but if I repeatedly sit in them and just throw myself on the chair and I'm not sitting down properly with care, I can break them even though I'm well within what the chair can carry. And obviously horses aren't chairs, but this is just one example. Light people may not realize the impact they can have on the horse's back if they just think that they're small and they're like a little bean that can't cause any harm to the spine. But if you're thumping around on the spine, or if your saddle doesn't fit, or there's other factors at play, you can cause damage. The other thing I wanted to bring up is regarding kissing spine in horses. A lot of people will use kissing spine as a reason to not exceed a certain amount of weight on the horse. One thing I wanted to bring up is that one of the top contributing breeds to kissing spine is thoroughbreds, many of which retire off of the racetrack. If weight was a huge factor in contributing to kissing spine, race horses in theory should have less instance than other horses because they are packing significantly less weight from the get-go than the average horse. And yes, you could factor in the fact that they're started young. However, lots of Western horses are started at the same age and oftentimes packing more weight for tack and more weight for riders for longer periods of time. And they still have a lower instance of kissing spine. Now, why is that? This is where conformation of the horse comes into play, which is why in order to actually get a good reading on whether or not the 20% rule is good as a hard rule, we need to also factor in the conformation of a horse. For example, we can look at people and we can recognize which human athletes are built in a way that allows them to achieve success at a certain sport or a certain skill set without having to do as much work. For example, like let's look at someone like Michael Phelps. The way he's built allows him to do that job of swimming in a superior way to the average human being, and he can do so in a much easier way. So for a horse who is built in a way to naturally carry themselves properly, lift their back, use that core, and drive from behind, they will have an easier time carrying a rider than a horse who struggles and is weaker through the back, less able to lift the core, and less able to pack a rider. For example, a horse with a really long back. If you have a horse that has a really long back and a weak top line and weak abdominal muscles, even if the rider is well within the weight they should in theory be able to carry, they might struggle to carry it because their back is weaker, and they might require more fitness training and more muscle building before it becomes easy for them to pack a rider, even if in theory they're well within the weight that is supposed to be safe. So I think that like teaching proper carriage and encouraging well-fitting saddles and encouraging people to learn about equine behavior so they can start to learn like the more subtle signs of discomfort in horses is far more important. And I had people, I brought this up on TikTok already earlier today. I had a few people bring up the fact of like saddle fit and that plus size riders may struggle to find a saddle that fits their horse's back and is not too long. Sure, that could be the case, but also this could apply to literally any rider riding a pony or a shorter backed horse if they have a big bum and they need a bigger seat, even if they're not a plus size rider, even if they're considered slender and small or petite. If they have a big bum and they need a bigger saddle than what the horse's back can accommodate, they're within the same type of issue as any plus size rider might experience. So it's not an issue that's specific to plus size riders. Additionally, saddle fit and causing horses back pain from riding them and being a weight that may be too much for that horse to carry is also not specific to plus size riders. So zeroing in on a certain weight class for this problem is inherently fat phobic because you're putting all of the blame on people who look a certain way or who you perceive to be above a certain weight, when these problems can be contributed to by anyone. A rider who is small and like thin and I don't know, like 5 feet tall, might get on a pony that they're too big for. They might have a poorly fitting saddle and they could cause back pain to that horse, even while being thin. And by making the focus of this argument solely targeted at plus size riders, we're missing out on all the contributing factors to back pain and overall pain in horses. The average rider that I see at the upper levels being like videoed and posted about, and that we see competing on like the average circuit, especially in the English world, they are not very heavy. They're far below what the average is for people in North America. Most of the body types you see are the same. They're usually slender, tall, skinny. There's a lot of them like that. And the ones who deviate from this typically are not by that much, especially when we're talking about like the hunter ring, equitation, and so on and so forth. A lot of these people, by definition, are not on the plus side margin. But when we go to shows, how many stress and pain behaviors can you find at the average horse show? Lots. So if the issue is equine welfare, we're missing out on a whole lot of problems by fixating on weight as the contributing factor to that, when there are so many riders who are well within the 20% rule who still have horses that are demonstrating discomfort and pain. So by making it a fixation on weight, we're not only holding some people who might be riding unsound, hurting horses less accountable, but we're also policing a certain demographic of people to a much higher degree than everyone else, which is not fair. And with how bad the perspective of body image is in the horse world, it doesn't take very much for people to think that you're too big. Even like there's lots of people can attest to this. If you've grown up showing the Eck, trainers can pressure you to lose weight and to look a certain way, even when you are at a healthy weight and you are perfectly fine size-wise for your horse. The perception of weight in the horse world is so skewed to a disgusting point, and it is inherently fat phobic, as I said before. So this is why, like, I think that we need to change the topic away from being solely directed at weight and instead change it to encouraging good saddle fit, encouraging people to teach their horses correct carriage and not divert to gadgets in an attempt to get to a certain goal sooner, like to teach the horse how to properly carry them instead of trying to rush it, because you cannot rush the building of muscle. If you fixate on like the overall, if the welfare of the horse is the concern, which is literally the main argument I ever hear for people like promoting the weight rule or trying to target riders that they view as heavier, the main argument I see is the welfare. So if welfare is the concern, we see equine welfare being damaged by people of all sizes. We see people of all sizes riding in poorly fitting saddles, using certain bits and gadgets that cause pain, riding horses who are clearly unsound, riding horses who are showing instances of back pain, riding horses through pain, punishing them for having pain behaviors, punishing them for not wanting to work with them. Riders of all sizes are guilty of this across all disciplines. It has no specific size range. So if our issue is equine welfare and potential pain and discomfort from horses, then that should be the topic at hand, because that doesn't have anything to do with weight. Someone who is light, even in theory, if they're the perfect size for the horse off of all these rules, they can still be causing their horse pain. And if we're not addressing that as the main issue, we're missing out on a whole lot of things where people could be educated and helped, and where we could promote better welfare in the horse world. But instead, we're fixating on certain sizes of people. And the reason why I think this is so problematic is that it results in people just looking at photos of other riders, and if they decide that in their head the person looks too big, then they're going to take that and run with it. And it results in people who are like even remotely off of like the average norm. Like until recently, we really didn't show many body types in equine magazines. It was all basically the same body type: tall, skinny, long legs. And people that are used to seeing that, anyone, even if they're like not very heavy, if they're curvier, they could perceive that person as being too big for their horse. And I see people doing this often, where they will then comment on these videos and make someone feel bad for riding their horse, insinuate the horse is in pain or distress, despite the fact that a lot of these horses show less discomfort than most of the ones we see at the upper levels of sport. It's exclusionary, and it really damages people for their body image. And I say this as someone who, like, I've literally had people comment on my weight and tell me I'm too big for horses before, and I am small. I'm 5'4" and I weigh like 120 to 125 pounds. I've had people tell me that I am too big for my horses because they thought my legs looked a little bit long, despite the fact that there's no way I was. And that type of skewed ideal is so problematic, because even if I'm not affected by people saying that to me, anyone who sees those comments who thinks they are bigger than me is going to feel impacted by that. And everyone who is seeing people post about the 20% rule and say really damaging things like no one over the weight of 200 pounds should ride a horse, anyone reading that, you could be targeting a huge number of people, many of which you probably like and respect. But because you're just policing people off of how their bodies look, instead of actually considering the whole picture of how the horse is feeling and how fit the person is, and so on and so forth, you're targeting people and making them feel like shit without realizing who you might be targeting. It is truly so easy to stay in your lane and not bring up weight as a problem. Because even if you think weight is the problem, if you're not there physically seeing what is going on and knowing the history of the horse, you don't know if it's the rider's weight that is causing discomfort or lameness. So if your concern is equine welfare and discomfort of the horse, why don't you just say that? You don't have to bring up weight at all. You could say, hey, like, I don't know if you've noticed, like, your horse seems to be switching his tail a lot. Tail switching can be a sign of pain. Have you had them checked for ulcers, or have you had their back checked or their saddle checked? You literally do not need to bring up weight to express concern that the horse might be uncomfortable. And with that said, this is not me saying that people should just ride horses that are clearly too small for them. But honestly, like, all of the videos that I've seen that have been like the worst in terms of like rider size versus horses are usually people around my size trying to ride around on miniature horses. Plus size riders, I think, are honestly more conscious of their weight because of how heavily they're policed. They're probably also more conscious of how their saddles fit and their horse's back health. I would argue that most of them would probably get more chiro and massage than the average thin person because they'd feel like they need to in order to have something to clap back to negative comments where they're being fat shamed. And like I said, there is absolutely nothing that shows that there's a higher correlation for uncomfortable horses with heavier riders versus thin ones, because conflict behaviors are seen across all disciplines and with all types of riders, men or women. And they're indicators of discomfort, but there's something that's not specific to someone's weight. So I think that fixating this on the weight and having so many people feed into this and like say it like it's a hard, quantified, proven rule that you cannot deny, it's false. There is not enough study on this fact for people to perpetuate it as being like the hard rule that everyone has to follow, and that if you're not following, you're being inherently neglectful and unkind to your horse. There's not enough research out there. So in order to get to that point, I would encourage people to push for more studies that actually compare different types of body types, different types of conformation of horses, different breeds, different ages, different fitness levels, different disciplines, different types of different genders of riders, different heights of riders. And you need to compile all of that in a pretty large sample size before you can actually get to the bottom of what the top contributing factors are for pain in horses. And honestly, like because of how easy it is to get body shamed in the horse world, I don't think that this problem is as prevalent as what people think it is. I think that the more pressing issue is the lack of knowledge on saddle fit, and also the lack of knowledge on how to teach horses how to correctly carry themselves, and also the desire to rush that with gadgets and what you decide to put and bits and stuff that you put your horse in to try to get them to the end goal sooner, because you're rushing fitness, and you can't rush fitness. They're going to build the muscle and the fitness at the same rate, regardless of whether or not you have them in a twisted wire gag or a German martingale or so on and so forth. All you're doing with that type of equipment is forcing them into a position that they're not yet ready to carry. And that can damage their ability to carry their back in a healthy way that is not painful. So these are the things that we need to be discussing, because there is not the large sample size, diverse study on all different types of people that we would need to have in order to police and shame heavier riders in the way that is happening and has happened for years. And I think that it is really wrong for people with large platforms to be using their platforms to perpetuate this information like it is conclusive fact, knowing that it is going to inevitably result in heavier riders that follow them feeling like shit, and also their following that is not heavy taking it upon themselves to police people because of their weight. It's irresponsible. It's really irresponsible, and it's just a crappy thing to do, because again, like it plays into the misogyny in the horse world as well. How many men do you see riding around on like 14 to 15 hand quarter horses with their 50-pound saddles? And sure, they might not look as curvy as a woman who is heavier, but they're easily the same weight, if not more. And seldom are they ever criticized in that way. It's always people who just appear to be carrying more weight, whether or not that is actually the case. People will look at someone that they think is more curvy or more like carrying more weight around the middle, even if you have big boobs or something like that that can change how your figure is perceived. Those are the people that get targeted. It's not just anyone who might be over 20% of their horse's weight, because that would include people on ponies. All literally, like, basically every freaking cowboy you can possibly think of in the Western world with their tack has a good chance of being above the 20% rule. And how many times do you see men being targeted for this? Because I don't ever see it happening. And obviously that's an anecdote, but women in general are disproportionately policed for their weight. And it is wrong. And there's already enough body shaming and misogyny in the horse world. We don't need to add to it, especially since a lot of the people that I've seen talking about this recently are women. So why are we feeding into stuff that will inevitably impact women in an unfair manner and also let men off the hook for doing literally the same thing, but just looking different? And there's a lot of different types of horses, and obviously like within reason, like they're like not everyone can necessarily ride the type of horse that they may want to ride, and there's factors to consider, but also like that's something that you kind of need to be more involved on the day-to-day with the horse to actually notice. And when so many people are unfairly criticizing riders who appear to be heavy and assuming that they are too heavy for their horses, whether or not that actually is the case, it loses any credibility when you're actually potentially talking to someone who may be too heavy. Because it does not take very much for someone to say that you need to lose weight or that you're too big for your horse. And the vast majority of people who get comments like that aren't even plus size riders. Literally anyone who deviates from what we have made in our heads, the norm for an equestrian, or anyone who we think just looks like a little bit heavy, they get put under that umbrella and they get criticized for their weight and told to lose weight. And I posted a video on my TikTok for anyone who wants to look of me, a photo of me back in 2016 before I started galloping, where I look way heavier than I do now. But guess what? The weights were not very different at all. The difference is muscle tone. And if I looked how I did, like back then was when I got most of the body shaming comments about myself being too big and having people say that I needed to like lose weight or get a bigger horse. And I had this said to me when I was riding my Era, but also when I was on like 16-hand thoroughbreds. And like if you look at the difference, I am actually generally heavier when my muscle tone is more, but people would point at the one where I am less toned and just like a little bit more like flabby, I guess. Like I'm not even overweight for my height in the before photo. I just don't have as much muscle, but I weigh less, generally speaking. And so it's not about just weight, because people that can acknowledge the fact that like, oh, if you look more toned and you're more fit and muscular, that's a good thing. Muscle weighs more than fat. So a lot of people who are muscular are going to be heavier. And you also can't define fitness simply by looking at someone. There's a lot of people who weigh significantly more than me that could run circles around my ass and have way better cardio than me. They could outlift me. They could outcompete me in a lot of different athletic sports. And they might look heavier than me. Me being smaller does not mean I'm more athletic or that I'm fitter than them. That's just people being fat phobic and pointing at me as the smaller person and assuming that must mean that I am more fit and athletic. And it is such an ingrained issue that I wanted to call it out because it's just completely unacceptable, especially since some of the people I've seen commenting on this are people who like could promote like diversity. Let's be inclusive. Let's be nice to everyone. Don't shame people. Don't make people feel like shit about their appearance. But then as soon as they can fat shame, that's where they go. And I got a comment that said like no one over 200 pounds should ride a horse. So I found that kind of funny because they were also defending the 20% rule. And saying that no one over 200 pounds should ride a horse is saying literally no one can, like, even if you get a bigger horse, you still can't ride. Because the 20% rule would mean that a 300-pound person could, in theory, ride a 1,500-pound horse. So if they actually believe in the 20% rule as law, then why are they picking these random weights to set as the cap when the 20% rule literally includes those weights? Because a 1,000-pound horse is like probably the average size of a horse. A lot of thoroughbreds, even the leaner ones, are within that size. And 200 pounds is 20% of 1,000. So, and also let's talk about like men. The average man, as I said earlier, is 197.9 pounds in the US. Tall men are going to weigh more than the shorter women, and they're going to look like they are less heavy than a woman who might be shorter and curvier, but they still weigh more. And then you're adding tack to it too. A lot of men ride Western. Western tack weighs way more than English tack. And still, do we see the most people being policed in the Western world? And do we see men being policed the most? No. Do we see women in the English world being policed the most? Yes, definitely. So it's actually not about weight, guys. And I welcome you to call people out on this because they are just letting their internalized fat phobia come out to play. Because if it is just about welfare and comfort for the horse, setting a number to it is a bad practice because then you're reiterating the idea that if you're a light person who is under the 20% rule, that you shouldn't have to worry about if your horse is comfortable carrying you. And that's really problematic. And also, like a lot of the issues that we see happening to horses are largely due to the biomechanics, like how they're ridden, how they're worked, how they're cared for, how their saddle fits, and a lot less to do with weight. Because if it was just weight, then why, like all of these thin people that we see all over the place at the upper levels and mid levels and everywhere in the horse world just being assumed to be the perfect size for their horse, they should have way lowered instances of soundness issues. And yet, we see soundness issues and conflict behaviors and stress behaviors and pain behaviors, even with those riders. So if weight was really a top contributing factor, there should be a very clear difference in comfort level between having smaller riders versus heavier ones. And there is not. We see the same type of rate of occurrence. And obviously, I can't provide statistics because we've not studied and quantified this. But the fact that I cannot provide statistics to prove that also means that on either side, you can't provide enough statistics to prove that there's a hard no for any weight over 20%. And like the amount of people, like someone just said, I know a girl who gave up English riding because of the body shaming. She went to Western riding because of that. The amount of people I've seen leave the horse world or get chased out of lessons because of how cruel people were to them about their body image is absurd. It's disgusting. We should all be very embarrassed by this. And we should stop pretending that it's about equine welfare, because if it was, there wouldn't be the focus on weight. Most of the issues that we see pertaining to equine welfare are due to like management, training practice, and general like equipment. They're not due to weight. If we're really concerned about equine welfare, why aren't we addressing the top contributing factors that we know cause a lot of issues? Like there's been a bunch of studies that have come out recently that have found that horses in turnout are significantly less likely to get soft tissue injuries compared to horses who are stalled. So we know horses in turnout are way sounder, and yet so many people are still willing to defend upper level equestrians not turning out their horses enough, still willing to defend stalling horses for extended periods of time, doing small paddocks, isolated turnout, and so on and so forth, despite the fact that we know that it causes a whole ton of physical and mental health issues in horses. Again, similarly, we know that certain types of bit and equipment cause increased levels of stress and pain and discomfort in horses. We even have different types of ways to actually quantify and define pain in horses by looking at their behaviors. And yet people will still defend a lot of this type of equipment, and they will still defend just riding for pleasure and not really caring about how the horse is carrying themselves, despite the fact that a hollow horse is more likely to have back injury and more likely to be less able to pack weight in a safe manner. It's not about welfare if you're fixating on something that isn't contributing to the main issues that we are seeing on a rampant basis in the horse world, because there's way more factors involved in this than weight. And again, like there's not enough information out there to like set a firm rule. I think that the 20% rule is good as a general rule of thumb. However, I don't think people should pick that as a hill to die on, because I would argue when you're comparing horses who are weaker or newer to riding or have less top line, you shouldn't necessarily do the max of any potential weight category for those horses because they're not fit. They're not ready to start at the max of what, in theory, they should be able to carry. Similarly, a horse who is very fit and built in a way that they are strong-backed and able to pack weight might be able to carry more than, in theory, another horse of a similar weight would be able to carry with different conformation. So there's too many variables, and there's all, like, we see such a high instance of wastage in horses and lameness and pain behaviors and conflict behaviors as is that is not being properly addressed. So it's just weird to me to pick this one thing that we see getting cherry picked and passed around so often as the hill to die on and as like the epitome of like being a good rider and a fair rider to your horse, when like saddle fit and the equipment you ride and like how you care for and manage your horse on a daily basis are arguably going to affect their welfare way more. I've seen way more horses run into the ground and lamed by people who are the societal norm of what we want to see, like of what people see as the ideal equestrian and what we see being idealized in the community based off of what's selected for models and whatnot. I see way more horses being lamed by those body types than any of the ones where people are like, oh, like plus size riders, such a problem, like the weight rule, we gotta protect horses. And it's like, we're not protecting them because you're letting anyone who you think looks a certain way off the hook for literally doing welfare issues to their horse. I hate this. It's stupid. It's really dumb. I think that we need to look at welfare on a horse-by-horse basis because there's a lot of people who fit the margin for this weight rule that are actively causing discomfort and harm to their horse. Like, even if you want to go into like different types of shoeing practice, a horse who has absolutely atrocious feet and has caudal failure from how it has been shod is not going to be having a good time packing any weight, let alone like the 15 to 20% or more. Or a horse who has kissing spine, just because their rider's thin, even if they're 5 to 10% of their weight, if their kissing spine is really severe, the person being small isn't going to help them with that. So again, this is not to say that we should like encourage people to ride horses that they are clearly too big for when the horse is displaying discomfort, but to just like set a number and stick with that fails to recognize how much fitness and like general riding ability and fitness of the horse too can impact the ability for a horse to comfortably carry a rider. Because are we honestly going to say that the thinner rider, even if they're less fit and less experienced, is going to cause less discomfort to the horse than a bigger rider who is fitter and more experienced simply because they weigh a little bit less? Like, are we really going to say that? Like, come on, guys. Give your head a shake. And like, the people that I see talking about this the most, it's always like the thin riders that like and I can say this because I've seen enough of these people online for years. They have never been overweight in their fucking lives. So it is really easy for these types of people to judge everyone else because it's never a problem that they've had to deal with themselves. They've never felt the judgment of that. And I can say this as someone too, like I haven't felt the same judgment that a plus size rider would feel because I haven't been plus size. I haven't lived that, but I can relate to how they feel because I watch it happen and I'm like, what the hell is going on? But like to see all these people who have grown up like petite and looking exactly how people want riders to look and never having to feel like their body is being shamed, or if they do get body shamed, it's to a lesser degree. Phoebe, you're interrupting me. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so it's always the thin people, and like they don't grow up with the same level of discrimination. It gives off the same vibes as like a white person trying to talk about how much racism there is in the horse world. Like, and they're also not giving the platform to listen to people who are like plus size riders and to like listen to what they like, what steps they take to ensure their horse's comfort. They're literally just looking at these people, judging how they look and saying, oh, you're causing your horse discomfort because you look like this. And that's the whole problem I have with this. It's not the fact that I think horses don't have a weight limit, because I think every horse in theory does have a weight limit, but I think that weight limit actually fluctuates because when they're young and their spine is still developing, you'll want less weight on them than what you would a mature horse who has developed their spine and put on muscle. Similarly, a horse who's really old might have their weight limit reduced as they age, even if in theory they used to carry heavier riders. And horses who are more conformed to pack more weight and carry it comfortably can carry more weight than those who don't have that. And without taking all those factors into account, you're inevitably, even if that is not people's intention, they are inevitably going to encourage body shaming and body policing of literally anyone that someone can perceive as being heavy. Literally anyone. And also, I want to point out the fact that, like, no one can actually look at someone and tell their weight. Like, I already said how much I weigh, so I can't tell, like, I can't just stand up and be like, oh, guess how much I weigh, guys. But, like, at the racetrack when I was galloping there, like, I got told several times by numerous different people, they're like, oh yeah, like, you're only like 100 pounds, like, you're just a little person, like, you could jockey, like, you're just like 100 pounds. Oh yeah, you weigh like 95 pounds sopping wet. I have never in my adult life ever weighed 100 pounds. Never. I've always been heavier than that. I have never weighed that little, but people looked at my body type, how I look when I am fit and when I'm muscular, and they took that and they were like, oh yeah, she's got to be that small. They cannot tell what your weight is. They were a full 20 to 30% off of what my actual weight is just by looking at me. And they underestimated it. So if people can underestimate to that degree with someone my size, when you are conditioned societally to see any bigger person as not the ideal equestrian, you're going to be more biased to judge them and perceive them as being bigger than they are because you've been raised to have that bias, especially if you're willing to perpetuate these fatphobic remarks so freely. But the fact of the matter is people can't tell weight. Like, if people are walking around thinking I weigh 100 pounds, in theory, I should be able to get on a horse who is like, fuck, I can't do math, but like, I should be able to get on way smaller horses than I am and have it be like no problem and be well within their size. But I would be too big for them, probably, like for little ponies, especially for extended periods of time riding them. But like, if people think I weigh that much, I could literally fudge it and just start getting on whatever I want and lie. And people would view it as acceptable because of my size. And like, on the flip side, you can have someone who is like totally the right size for their horse that someone just decides in their head looks big, and then they police them and they're like, oh, you're too big for your horse, like, you got to worry about this. So this is why this is a dangerous mindset to normalize and to perpetuate, because if welfare is the concern, why don't we focus on the top contributors to equine welfare issues? None of which are really weight related at all. They're related to how we ride and train and care for our horses and how we exploit them with the equipment we use to make them do the jobs that we want them to do, and how punishing the culture of equestrianism is, and how forceful people can be with their horses, and how few horses actually get their 3 F's met. 3 F's is friends, freedom, forage. Very few boarding facilities actually do free choice forage. It is very hard to find a boarding facility that actually does free choice turnout. As far as I'm concerned, I would way rather promote plus-size riders in the sport who are exemplifying good care of their horses than give a platform to anyone who is not plus-size trying to talk about what weight you need to be to ride. And yeah, I understand like setting weight limits for your own horses because you're entitled to do that. If you know your horse and you know what they can comfortably carry, then it's fine to have an idea in mind, like with what you want to have on them, that like, because they're your horse. With that said, when you take that to other people and you start to project those views onto other people, that is not your place. Like, for example, it is my place if once Banksy started under saddle. My boyfriend loves Banksy. Will he get to ride him when he is this young? No, because my boyfriend weighs more than I do. And for a young horse who is just building fitness and becoming a riding horse, I don't think it's fair to add that much weight, and it's also just unnecessary, especially when that rider is a less experienced rider. Will he get to ride the horse in the future once he's more developed and older? Absolutely. Will he be an okay size to do so then? Yes. Is it necessary for me to put on someone who's significantly more weight than me on one of my personal horses who is young and growing when I can do all the training myself and keep it within a margin that is safer to play, like for a horse whose spine is not fully developed? No, that is my decision as a person with my own horse. And again, like if I decided to start him this year as a 3-year-old, I would be even more cautious within this year for the amount of weight I would ask him to pack and for how long. And that includes myself. I wouldn't want to be sitting on his back and having my weight on him for lengthy periods of time when he's really young, especially as he's building fitness and developing. Even if I'm well within the weight range that should be defined as fine, because he's young. I don't want to put it all onto him at once. And similarly with horses off the racetrack or horses that are coming back into work, doing groundwork with them to start preparing them and to build muscle is a great way to build that fitness and do so in a safe way that is less likely to cause injury, because you're not asking them to pack additional weight before their top line has started being developed. And like, these are all little things that like anyone can do, but it is literally none of your business to be going on other people's pages or to be perpetuating the mindset that there's like some firm rule for like what is the actual safe weight for a specific horse, because it differs so much. And by making it that rigid of a rule, like, we're screwing horses over in the process, because you're leading people to believe that that's like a hard rule for any horse and that there's no differentials for weight, conformation, age, height, build, breed, fitness level, and so on and so forth. Like, not acknowledging the diversity and how many variables there are in this topic is doing everyone, including the horses, a disservice. And it's also putting the fixation for the welfare issues in the wrong place, because we're not discussing how many problems contribute to the very soundness issues that people are attributing to weight. How many of those problems are actually contributed to by like equipment, general care, and like even diet. Like, horses who aren't getting fed appropriately to build the muscle that they need to carry a rider are going to struggle to carry a rider if they don't have the muscle to do so. It is just a very multifaceted issue. And I think that, like, especially at people with a platform who are influencers, shame on you if you feed into this and present it as fact when it is not that. The studies that have been done on this are small, they're not diverse enough, and they do not cover all of the variables that would need to be considered to actually present this as fact. So framing it as such when you have a huge following is inherently irresponsible. You can say, I personally abide by the 20% rule, and this is what I believe based off of the studies that I've read. But as soon as you just start telling people like, oh no, you're wrong, like this is a complete fact, there's not even any slight variability within this. Like, you can't go any amount over the 20% rule, but also like, even if your horse is young and really, really young, you should still, like, 20% is totally fine for them to carry if it's the 20% of their weight. It's not addressing the variability. And it's also misrepresenting the actual facts of the situation. And it harms people, which is why I wanted to call this out right now when I'm heated, because it, like, I see people saying mean things to riders about their weight all the time. And I also hear it when people come to me and talk to me about their problems. A few years ago, I wrote a blog post on the dark side of the horse industry, and I had a bunch of people submit their stories, and so many of those stories were related to body image and weight, and so many riders had gotten pushed to do crash diets by trainers and other people in the horse community, or who had chosen to do crash diets themselves because of how they were treated by their peers and trainers and other people around them. So many people struggling with eating disorders and body image issues because of the norms that we allow to occur in the horse world. And a lot of those people were never at any point actually considered plus size or overweight. So I'm sure you can imagine how deeply ingrained this issue is if it's impacting people of all body types. But the fixation on plus size riders in specific is absolutely ridiculous, because, like, if that's the hill people are gonna die on, you better be saying that you're against all men riding if they are like the same weight as any plus size women you target, which would be a stupid thing to do. And honestly, most of them wouldn't, because a lot of these people have professionals and people they respect that would be targeted by that mindset that they wouldn't want to target. And yeah, it's just flawed and it's irresponsible. And that's like a hill I'm gonna die on. And so someone just said, but okay, wait, I missed the first part of that. I'm just gonna go through these comments quickly. Yeah, someone said people automatically assume that you're fat because you're lazy, never stop to think that someone might have a medical problem. Exactly. And even like outside of medical issues, there's different metabolisms. Like, people handle their bodies are different metabolisms. It is so messed up to just look at someone and assume that athletic and fit looks the same on every type of body, because it doesn't. The athletic body type differs a lot. Like, literally go look up any year of the Olympics, be it summer or winter. Go through all of the different sports, look at the athletes competing in them, and let's look at how different their body types are. guaranteed there's going to be some people that if they were on a horse, you would consider too heavy or too big, but they are probably fitter than most of us here. And the only reason people would think that they are not is because they are judging them solely off of how their body looks. Then someone else said, but I would much prefer we teach everyone to understand basic spine mechanics. Weight has nothing to do with fat. I train my horses with weighted sandbags. It's just a number. I totally agree. And also regarding fat, the other thing to consider is that in theory, an overweight horse weighs more. Does that mean they are more capable of carrying more weight than a fit horse who weighs less? No. So it doesn't even apply just to people. The horse weighing more does not necessarily mean that they're more equipped to handle more weight than another horse who weighs less. And missing out on that point is also setting up horses for failure, because you're making people think like if my horse is just a bit heavier, it's going to be fine. I'll be able to pack my weight easier. Let's put more weight on them. Or like a fat horse, like totally fine. Like they can carry weight easier because they weigh more. No, they're not as fit. And similarly, a rider who looks thin and is completely unfit and has no balance and no fitness is going to do a lot more damage on the back of a horse than a heavier rider who is fit and has balance and is prepared to actually ride in the way that they're being asked to do, or the way that they're expecting their horse to carry them in. In my experience, overweight people I've known have tried their best to prepare their horses to carry them, while skinny people ride the tiniest young ponies and see nothing wrong. I agree with this as well. I think that the amount that people's bodies are policed in the sport leads a lot of people who are even if you're not technically overweight, if you're on the cusp of being perceived as overweight or too big for your horse by anyone, you're going to be more cautious because there is so much body shaming surrounding that makes you really self-conscious of that. And that leads those people to be more careful. And I would argue they'd also be quicker to check their saddles and do body work on their horses than a lot of thin people, because a lot of people would just be like, oh, like my horse is like 1,200 pounds and I weigh 80 pounds. Like this is nothing. It's like I'm carrying a backpack. But it's like, okay, if you're a backpack that's thumping all over him and being off balance, it'll do more damage than a heavier backpack that sits well. Let's see. Yeah. And like also the other thing to consider is like children. Like a lot of lesson barns are catering to kids, and obviously kids weigh significantly less than adults. So in theory, if it was just regarding weight, should lesson ponies not be the soundest ponies out there? And they're not. In fact, they have a lot of back issues and they get sore easier because they're having to carry around these unbalanced people who might be small, but they're still unbalanced, and their weight difference doesn't actually help out the horses that much because they're unbalanced. And this isn't me saying that kids shouldn't be allowed to ride, but it's also like no one's going to look at the average lesson barn or look at a kid who's horse crazy and wants to learn how to ride and be like, oh, sorry, you can't learn how to ride because you bounce too much, even though you only weigh 50 pounds. They're not going to do that, but they're also not going to consider the fact that it could also cause the horse discomfort if the rider's unbalanced. So yeah, like I think the things to consider is your horse fit? Is your horse healthy? What's their top line like? Are they showing signs of discomfort? Because also like it's so unfair that you can see a video of a heavier rider riding around on a horse who is not tail swishing, not gaping at the mouth, not like having like by tail swishing I mean like helicopter tail. I'm not talking about like swishing at flies. And not showing clear signs of discomfort or pain, and they can get criticized. Meanwhile, you can have these upper level riders who have horses that are gaping at the mouth. Their tails are like a freaking windmill, and people will just be like, oh no, like that's just like that's just how the horse is. They're excited for competition, or like, oh, so and so is such a good rider, like you've never competed at that level, you can't criticize them. And it's ridiculous. Biomechanics can change your horse's ability to pack weight, and that's something to consider the most, is your horse's fitness and their actual ability to carry weight comfortably and use their back comfortably. It is not our place to set a number on that. And until we have the research that controls all of these variables and tests all these different things with different demographics of people and horses, we're not going to be able to conclusively make this claim. So since we can't do that, the focus needs to be on equine welfare. Like, what can we do to make horses more comfortable? Promote good saddle fit, promote good welfare, promote good management, promote good training practice, discourage certain types of equipment that we know has a high instance of causing mass harm and discomfort in horses and doesn't actually facilitate their biomechanics in learning how to carry a person properly. So stuff like draw reins, German martingales, harsh bits, and other types of equipment that the entire goal of it is to try to get a horse manufactured into a position sooner than they're ready for it. it doesn't give them the fitness to carry the rider just because you're pulling their head down. Additionally, horses who do stuff like rush fences, which is a very common behavior to see in all levels of jumping, they're not as balanced as a horse who is very adjustable and doesn't rush. They're also typically more stressed than horses who have learned not to rush and who have learned to rate the fences and to go around more correctly without hollowing out as much. All of these show jumpers we see going around like this, like going like this at the bit, trying to get away from their harsh bit and galloping at the fence, they're hollow. And when horses hollow out, I don't know if anyone has seen that figure. I can't put it up on live right now. But there's an image, an infographic of like a horse that shows the spine, and it shows the horse in like a nice frame where their back is lifted and they're stretching out with their nose out, and then it shows a horse who's high-headed with their head up like this, evading the bit, and it shows how their spine will press together, and this is how you get kissing spine too. They hollow out and they have less room between their vertebrae, so then you can get rubbing and pinching, and of course it's less comfortable. But do we see people policing all these thin upper level riders or like lower level riders riding around on these hollow horses with no top line, just galloping at fences? No. Go right now. Pretty sure the Kentucky 3-day event's coming up this weekend. I have a challenge for all of you guys. Let's go and look at all these horses during the jog ups and check out their top lines, because I have seen some horses who are competing at like the 5-star level that have basically no top line, and people will still defend that and they'll be like, oh, they're fit for the job, they're exceptionally fit, like they're built to do this, but they'll have hollows behind their wither, and you can see the back on some of them, even at the upper levels. I'm not saying all eventers do this. I'm saying go look, because this is the pinnacle of the sport with the best riders in the world, and we're still seeing horses who do not have the muscle development that shows signs of actually being able to comfortably carry a rider without damaging their spine. And people let that shit fly because they're like, oh, these are upper level riders, who cares? And that's not fair. So it all comes down to like people learning about how to teach their horse how to carry them effectively and being conscious of what their horse is telling them. And all of that goes back to learning about equine behavior, being conscious of like certain types of conflict behaviors and looking for the cause of unwanted behaviors rather than looking to just suppress the unwanted behavior. Because there's a whole lot of horses who tell you when they're feeling uncomfortable, and riders have been taught to ignore that or punish them and make them work through it. And that results in the horses just having to suppress those behaviors and hide them, even if they're still in discomfort and pain. And yeah, so this is just something to consider, because also I would argue a good portion of the riders that are being criticized the most for their weight or being perceived as too heavy for their horses actually do fall within the 20% range of their horse or very close to it. I don't think the problem of a rider being significantly over that perceived rule is as big as what people make it out to be, because they get like heavy riders get chased out of the sport on a daily basis. So like realistically, like they're the people that are being policed the most for their horses' discomfort, even if their horses show less signs of discomfort. So it is silly to think that these people are the biggest contributors to welfare issues in the sport, or that they're like that's the hill we gotta die on in terms of promoting welfare. And like I said, there's better things to focus on that I think address more of the problems and actually portray them accurately. There's better things to focus on, and it's also less hurtful and has less potential to really damage people's body image and result in fat phobia and fat shaming and body shaming and perpetuate like the misogyny that is holding women to a higher degree of accountability than male riders in terms of their weight and their fitness level. The other thing to consider too is that like women have boobs. So like at least most women have boobs. A lot of women have boobs. Some women have really large boobs. This adds to their weight, and it can also make them appear heavier than they are. Men do not have boobs. A tall man with lots of muscle is going to weigh more than a woman who has boobs. The woman who has boobs is going to appear like she has more fat on her body because she does, because women have more fat on their bodies than men do. So if we continue down this road, we're just telling everyone, first of all, it is more okay to police women's bodies than it is to do men. 2, you can tell someone's weight just by looking at them. 3, you can tell someone's fitness level just by looking at them. 4, who cares if the horse is fit enough to carry the weight if they fall within the 20% rule? 5, there's no differential in horses' ability to carry weight based on the 20% rule. It's just a hard rule that does not change regardless of the age, breed, conformation, fitness of the horse. Like, that's silly. There's fluctuation because fitness levels, you know? Do you go into weightlifting being able to lift the max weight that you can once you're trained and fit? Do you? Does anyone do that? No. Neither do horses. So yeah, I welcome people to look at top lines and horses' overall behavior and fitness level before they judge. Because also, like, my 3-year-old that is standing out in the pasture right now has more top line than a lot of people's riding horses, despite the fact that he has never been sat on. So in theory, he is more able to pack weight than a lot of people's horses who have weak top lines that are older and don't have the same level of core strength. So these are all things to consider. It takes time to build top line, it takes time to build muscle, it takes time to build fitness. But you cannot just look at a horse and a person and know exactly how much they weigh and how, like, what percentage of the horse's weight the person is. And when we try to make it out to be like you can do that, we're inevitably encouraging people to body shame other people. And also, like, a lot of the gadgets and bits that we use in the horse world to try to get horses to go around the ways we want to actually don't allow them to learn self-carriage and don't facilitate teaching them how to lift their back and carry a rider well. So they cause damage to the horse as well. But anyways, what I said at the beginning of this video, I'm going to reiterate right now. If weight was such a huge contributing factor in back health and like kissing spine and other issues in horses, in theory, race horses should have the lowest degree of kissing spine and those types of problems. And they don't. So why is that? Like, why would a quarter horse who's packing around a 50-pound saddle and a 200-pound man when they weigh less than a thoroughbred and are smaller, why would they come out of that with less spinal issues than a racehorse, even when they're being started at the same age? It's almost like weight doesn't always contribute, and there's conformational things that contribute to back issues in horses and other types of things. Perhaps like being stalled 24/7 at the racetrack, or only ever being trained for speed and not being taught how to do proper self-carriage. It's almost like this is a very diverse issue that has a lot of things contributing to it. You see where I'm going here, because it is. So I hope that this gets back to the people who need to see this, because I'm very disappointed in what I saw on TikTok today, and we should all just be very embarrassed because it's gross. Like, the amount that we enable body shaming and like the body policing of women and femme presenting people in specific is disgusting, and it needs to stop, especially since the vast majority of equestrians are women. Why are we policing women more than men, and why are men being allowed more opportunities at the upper levels than women on average, and why are they being held to a lower standard in terms of their weight and their perceived fitness just by looking at them? Why are we enabling this and happening when most of us identify as women and we make up the largest demographic in the horse world? We should not be encouraging this. So yeah, like I'm not, this is not to say that people should not consider the amount of weight their horse is packing, but it's to say that you should be considering like a bunch of other factors, because like the amount of weight, the time they spend packing it, what you're asking them to do, the horse's fitness level, your weight, and all of those things, saddle fit, and all, like, how well the horse carries themselves, how the horse is built. All of these things contribute, and they can change the outcome to a large extent. And when we try to make it like it's super simplistic, we're missing out on a lot of the issues that cause horses grief and cause them discomfort. I'd say the best course of action is just encouraging people to learn more about equine behavior and more about how to read the subtle signs of pain in their horses, because then they are more able to be able to read and check on things that their horse is telling them before it becomes a major problem. Additionally, we need to normalize good management, normalize friends, freedom, forage, turnout, the ability to express autonomous behavior on their own time when they're not in work, teaching your horses how to properly carry themselves rather than trying to force them to. All of that stuff, really important, will impact welfare immensely. Another hill that I'll die on is honestly management matters a lot more than what we do in training, in my opinion, because management is how your horse is spending 99% of their time. Even if you ride every day for an hour a day, your horse is still spending the rest of their 23 hours on their own time, living in whatever management situation is provided for them. So in terms of welfare issues, that's something that should be talked about a lot too, because it does contribute to soundness issues in horses, and it also contributes to immense mental and physical health problems. The number one cause of mortality outside of old age in horses is colic. You want to know what one of the top contributors to colic is? Time spent stalled. Time spent stalled, and also just general stress, and also the lack of ability to have access to free choice forage. We know that that is the top issue killing horses, and yet there is a lot less fixation on addressing the issue with how we have normalized the keeping of horses than there is about talking about people's bodies. And this goes so far beyond even just weight. Like, let's think about how common it is to make fun of other riders based off of the color of riding clothes they choose to ride in, the show jacket they choose to enter the arena in, their hairstyle, their color of their hair, the color of their skin. Like, the amount of policing that there is for the riders simply off of how they look, even though it has nothing to do with how they ride or care for their horses, it's absurd. And like, people value that more than actual welfare of the horse. And I see it repeatedly across so many issues in the horse world that it's pretty clear to me that it's not actually about the horse, because the fixation is always on the rider and how they look, and also always on the rider and like their status, what they're able to do if they have nice horses. The higher level you compete, the fancier horses you have, the more acceptable it seems to be to abuse them. But if you're a backyard rider who rides in clothes that people perceive as tacky, it's okay to judge you to a larger degree, even if the horses are happier. Someone just brought up George Morris. That's a really good point. So people like George Morris perpetuate the body shaming in the horse world. He is the worst. I can say this as someone who audited one of his clinics several years ago. He body shamed someone I know in front of the entire clinic when there was hundreds of auditors and I think like 8 people in the clinic. He looked at her, and I will quote, I still remember it to this day because it was so horrible and I was appalled. He looked at her and was like, "You are fat. F-A-T, fat. Get off the horse's back." And yelled that in front of the entire class. This person was not plus sized. This person was not a big person. This person was on a large horse who was a draft cross and exceptionally well conditioned. And this person cares for her horses incredibly well. I've known this person for like 2 decades almost now. A long time. One of the best horse people I know. He did that in front of a crowd and made her feel like shit. Can you imagine one of your idols saying that to you in front of everyone? And he's done that on a repeated basis in numerous clinics. It's obvious, like, obviously it's good that he's been completely thrown out of the horse world and has lost his favor, but the damage that someone like him has done is still here. And people contribute to that because there's a lot of people who idolized him, and despite the fact that we now all know that he's a pedophile, there's enough people who still do support him. And a lot of people in the horse world perpetuate the whole tough love style of training, where you're literally just bullying people and you're trying to play it off as like holding them more accountable and just helping them out in a blunt way when it's literally just bullying. And that type of normalized body shaming is disgusting. That was several years ago now, and like honestly now if I audited him in a clinic, I would want to like heckle him from the crowd if I ever heard that happen again, because that is just so not okay on so many levels. But the damage people like him have done is still around, because he taught a lot of the professionals that we see today. He taught them how to ride or worked with them pretty like closely. And he passes off a lot of his ideals and thought processes onto those people as a result. And then those people pass on those mindsets onto their students, or they traumatize students from what they say to them. Even if the student doesn't take that and use it on other people in the future, the damage is done. And he's also not the only trainer that has done this. There are lots of trainers that do the same body shaming, tough love type thing. Like I said, that blog post I did several years ago, the amount of riders that I had come forward that admitted that their trainer tried to put them on a crash diet so that they'd lose weight is absurd. And these people were underage. They were children. There is grown adults telling children to stop eating and to just go on juice diets or to try to only eat 400 calories a day. Grown adults telling kids to do this. Children. And people who are respected in the community encouraging this. This is such a deeply ingrained issue that we do not need to contribute to more by focusing on these types of issues. Because also, like, the weight rule is not specific to people who appear to be plus sized in your opinion. The weight rule is specific to what the horse tells you, their overall comfort and their actual capacity and ability to carry a rider, which can vary pretty greatly. So with this in mind, like, we need to reconsider how we handle these things. Like, it's really problematic, and it's gross, and it's unnecessary, and it's not helpful. It is not helpful to someone to just look at how they look and tell them they're too big for their horse and just do so out of sheer meanness. Because first of all, how many riders that own a horse are actually going to sell their horse and get out of riding because of what someone said on the internet to them? Probably not very many. They're just going to feel like garbage, and you're going to impact their body image, and you're probably going to leave them with trauma that impacts them for years to come. But they probably won't sell their horse, most of them. So with that in mind, it's like you're not helping the horse. You're just making the rider feel like trash and potentially pushing them down the road of going into unhealthy eating habits and unhealthy body image. It's not helpful. And like, there are studies also on like body image issues in people and like weight loss in people. And they're overwhelmingly, they show that shaming people for their weight is not effective at all in helping them get to a quote unquote better weight. Like, it doesn't help at all. Body shaming does not impact people in a positive way. In fact, a lot of the correlations that we've seen in study are the opposite. It impacts them negatively, and it results in them having worse body image issues and potentially getting aggressively more unhealthy because they feel like shit about themselves, and you've now tanked their mental health, made them potentially develop bad eating practices, and also made them ashamed of nourishing their body like a normal person and getting to enjoy food like a normal person, like everyone should, simply because you have looked at them and you've made judgments solely off of how they look. That's not okay. There's also one thing that I'm going to out myself for right now is I don't have healthy eating habits. I eat like shit. I love sugar. I just demolished an entire fucking thing of cherry blasters. Not the little one, the whole one. And I can eat like 3 chocolate bars in one day when I'm binge eating. Right now, with the job that I'm working, I don't really put on weight. Does that mean I eat healthier than someone who's heavier than me? Abso-fucking-lutely not. I eat like shit sometimes. And I also don't have healthy eating habits. I've been working on them because I've had struggles with like the medication I'm on to eat properly. But like, people would look at me and they'd assume that my diet is better than someone heavier than me, and that is fat phobia because I eat like garbage. I don't eat well. I eat too much sugar. I know I eat too much sugar. I love sugar. It's like my guilty pleasure. It's probably my biggest vice is how much sugar I eat. But people will look at me and they will assume that it's less of a problem because of how I look than it would be if I was like, I don't know, 30 to 50 pounds heavier. As soon as if I put on that weight and I was eating literally the same diet as I am now, suddenly people would have more of an issue with it. And that is fat phobia. Now, to answer this person's question, what's your thoughts about Raleigh's statement? I think it's irresponsible, cruel, targets probably a good portion of her audience, either to make them feel bad about their weight or make them feel like they can go and police other riders for their weight. And yeah, again, misinformation. It's not presenting the information we have in an honest way. And it's totally fine if people have their own opinions for what they choose to do with their horses, but to perpetuate it as facts to the masses, especially with a following like that, not okay. Because I also can, like, I'm pretty sure her following on average is a lot younger than mine. And I say this just because my following, with how, like, I don't have a lot of kids following me. I know that she has a large portion of young up and coming riders. And what she has said, whether or not someone actually fits into the rule or is over the rule that she said, if people feel or already felt like they were heavy or already were insecure about their weight, seeing that video, whether what she said actually applies to them or not in practice, it is going to make them feel shittier. Because if they had any insecurity about their weight or about being too big for their horse before, or if someone has said that to them, whether or not it is true, having someone that they idolize and respect point it out and say that it is fact is going to bring all those feelings back up and make them apply that to themselves, whether or not it is true. So that is why I think it's so irresponsible. Because also it's like you're saying this to a younger audience. Not that it would be better to say it to an older audience because it would still do damage, but young people are a lot more impressionable and stuff that people say sticks with you. Like the amount of things that I was told as a kid that have impacted me into adulthood in a negative way is significant. And I think that that needs to be taken into account. And also, we need to reconsider how we handle things. Because as I've said, like, if you're thin enough to appeal to what people view as the ideal, you're allowed to eat like shit. You're allowed to not be as healthy. You're allowed to not be as fit. And you can still pass for being all of those things simply because you look thinner than other people, even if it's not at all true in practice. And that's not fair. Like, honestly, like, I am just fortunate that my metabolism is how it is right now, that I can eat how I do and not put on weight in the same way other people might struggle with. But that doesn't mean that I'm eating any healthier. It doesn't mean that it's better for me to be eating the amount of candy and sugar that I do. It doesn't mean that it's like that I'm more entitled to going to eat fast food and eat foods that are high in fat than anyone else. It's still the same thing. And policing people for what they can eat and what they can do solely off of how they look is always going to have a negative impact on large portions of people. And it is irresponsible for influencers to put that out. This is also why, like, for my platform, like, I've had companies contact me wanting me to advertise like diet shakes and like different types of drinks or like belly blends or juice diets and stuff like that. And I won't do it because, first of all, I wouldn't fucking eat that shit. I just wouldn't. It's not what I would do. It's gross. And secondly, I don't want to peddle that to my audience because it's wrong. I don't want that to be what I'm trying to sell to people and like with the attitude that I'm trying to put out to people. And I think also with this type of stuff, people need to reconsider what they're actually saying. Because you could weigh in on this weight issue and you could say, yes, we need to make sure that riders and horses are paired to suit both of their fitness levels and for the horse to be comfortable and the horse is comfortable in the tack that they're wearing and that they're not in distress and you're not riding a sore horse. But that's something that applies to everyone. It's not just applicable to heavier riders. It applies to literally everyone. But it is disproportionately directed at women who appear to be heavier than others. And that's not okay. It's not. Because as I've said, like, people have made up different weights for me and assumed that I'm healthier, fitter, smaller, and whatever than I am just because of how I look. And that's like so messed up. And then they assume that people who are heavier than me are more unhealthy or less fit and less able to do the same tasks as me, even when a lot of cases they're fitter than me. It's ridiculous. So I think that like we just need to push the idea of like considering all horses' welfare and considering the multitude of factors that there are in addressing good welfare and ensuring your horse is happy and focusing on that. Because also the other thing is like skinny riders can post videos of their horses having complete conniptions and like bucking them off and having conflict behaviors without meeting the same repercussions. Meanwhile, if a heavier rider does that, people are way quicker to jump to blaming their weight as the sole cause of the horse's behavior, whether or not that's true. Meanwhile, if a thin rider posts literally the exact same thing happening, it's less likely to be attributed to the size of the rider that is causing the horse's behavior, which is not fair. And again, if it's about welfare, it really shouldn't matter. It's about the horse and how they experience things. And if a horse is happy and well cared for and having their every need met under a rider who you think is heavy, no one cares what you think about it. Please just shut up. That like, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk, because like, yeah, it's just gross. And like I've obviously had like a lot of female friends and like people who have had body image issues. I've had body image issues myself. I've had people criticize how I look in my figure, but I don't get policed as much as someone who is heavier would, because like there's, like I said, there's an unfairness in terms of how people perceive thinner people versus heavier ones. But like so many women I know have body image issues. So many female presenting people I know have body image issues. So many people have body image issues, and we don't need to add to that, especially if the only goal is to improve equine welfare, because there's a lot of different ways you can literally describe the same concept without making the fixation be solely on the weight of the rider. Because also, like, the amount of thin riders that are riding around in saddles that don't fit or equipment that is harsh and unkind to the horse and causes them mass discomfort and predisposes them to injury because of that is excessive. It far exceeds any amount of like the perceived heavy rider that is riding their horse into the ground while being too heavy and blatantly ignoring pain signals. The amount of small riders there are that are ignoring pain signals on a daily basis and being put in the limelight for it far exceeds anything that I have ever seen regarding plus size riders. And like I also want to point out that there is like a certain ableist aspect to this, because people who are struggling with disabilities might not be as able to engage in certain activities to the same degree as someone who is able-bodied, and they might have different body types because of that. And if you're policing people solely off of their body type, you're ignoring the fact that they could have underlying conditions and health problems that are directly correlated to their body type, and you're putting it all on them like it's like their choice, like they've decided to have their body look a certain way, or they've just decided to like, yeah, like it's stupid, and it's ableist, because there's a lot of people who are fitter than me and more capable than me that are heavier, and there's also a lot of people like me that my size that are not fit and not capable and not athletic and can be causing damage to horses. And yeah, like we just need to consider the diversity in the horse book, because like comments like this, just like when I see people posting stuff like this, it just really is telling about how much they lack the ability to kind of put themselves in other people's shoes and consider other people's situations, because it fails to recognize, like, first of all, that like men ride horses and a lot of them would be above this perceived rule that people have, and two, people of different body types exist and should be allowed to exist and do so happily without people feeling compelled to comment on their bodies, because existing in public and having a body is not an invitation for people to comment on it. And also, yeah, like people should not have to tell you if they have a disability or some type of condition that may contribute to how they present to the world. They shouldn't have to tell that to you to avoid you being an asshole to them. They shouldn't. It's none of your business. You should live with the mindset of like, hey, this is not my business and I should not make judgments because I don't know the full story. And if you do find yourself making judgments and you're corrected, you need to stop for a second and consider how the other person is feeling, especially when they're in a group that is inherently more marginalized and policed than other groups of people. And we like this issue is like so pervasive in the horse world, and it extends far beyond weight, like I said, with like race, like clothing, financial status, and so on and so forth. There's a whole lot of judgment, but like this aspect contributes to all of it, and it just opens the doors for everyone to go and criticize anyone that they feel is too big for their horse, which can be, in a lot of cases, absolutely untrue. In most cases, absolutely untrue, because the whole fabled rider that is riding their horse while they're being too heavy for it and regularly doing so doesn't really exist, in my opinion. I've not seen it. The only instances where I've actually seen people who are like far too large for horses and horses who are like showing clear signs of discomfort. In 99% of these cases that I have ever seen, they're always people who are not horse people. It's people who are getting like maybe rich people who are getting a horse rented for a certain purpose, going on trail rides, or doing something where they are not experienced with horses, in which case you can comfortably say that they probably aren't aware of whether or not the horse is exemplifying signs of discomfort. The regular horse people that we see are not the ones that are contributing just to riding horses into the ground, ignoring the fact that their horse has clear issues that are directly pertaining to their weight. Because like I said, soundness issues and problems in horses are not specific to heavy people. A whole lot of skinny people have horses with them. So if it was a weight thing, you would see a way higher instance of issues under riders who are heavier than others, and children would have the soundest horses and they don't. So yeah, like I think that I'm disappointed in seeing like, yeah, someone like Raleigh with such a large platform saying these things, especially when she has commented and been against body shaming and other stuff in the past. It just it missed the mark, and I hope that she reconsiders what she said and puts out a message addressing that, because oversimplifying these issues inevitably results in people being targeted when they shouldn't be, and it's not fair. And also, you can't tell someone's weight by looking at them. So even the whole fabled 20% rule, it's like, you can only enforce that rule with yourself, because you can go stand on a scale and weigh yourself and then go weigh your horse. You cannot do that with anyone else's horse. So with that in mind, it's like the 20% rule doesn't exist if people are using it to apply to people without knowing the weight of them or their horse, and are just assuming that off of how they look that they are not within that rule. It's not an actual rule if you're just cherry picking people based off of how they look. So that's all I have to say. I'm going to be doing a blog post on body image issues in the horse world and fat shaming in the horse world for anyone who's interested. And I would love for people who are willing to send me photos of you and your horse and your height, your weight, to show off different body types within the same weight. I want to show how different multiple different weight brackets look on, like how different people within the same weight bracket look with different body types, because there is such a huge range and it's not talked about enough. It was something that I struggled with growing up, because my weight, me being shorter, I had friends who were taller than me that weighed less than I did, and that was an insecurity that I had until I realized, like, hey, I'm more muscular and this is just my build, this is how I am, great, I like my body. But I felt insecure because I didn't understand how much diversity there was in body type. And even with like BMI calculators, there were times where I would calculate as being overweight, despite the fact that I never actually was overweight, because of my height versus my weight. And it made me very insecure. So I want to do a blog post showing all of the different bodies people have, even when they are the same weight, just to drive home the point that you literally cannot look at someone and know how much they weigh. Because there are a ton of really athletic bodied people who are like literally walking hunks of muscle, and they might look light, but they weigh like a good 30 to 40 pounds or more heavier than what you think. And they shouldn't, like, it's weird that it's just being based off of how people look, because that there's no way to get around the fact that that's fat phobic if you're just looking at someone and deciding whether or not they're too big for their horse. So yeah, I'm doing a blog post on that for anyone who's interested in submitting photos. It doesn't matter like what your gender identity is, like what type of riding you do, how tall you are, how much you weigh. If you're comfortable sharing that information with me to do a blog post regarding the different types of bodies in the horse world and how they can look even when they are the same weight, feel free to email me. My email is shelby@milestoneequestrian.ca. You can also find it on my like main account page, and also probably in the description of this, or you can contact me on Instagram and DM me. Emails are usually easier for me to keep track of, so I would recommend that if anyone's able to. But if you're comfortable sharing that information with me, I would love to do a blog post on it, because I think it's important. I'm obviously going to include myself in the blog post, because like I said, like my weight for my height, I am a little bit heavier for my height than a lot of other people that I know that are the same height as me. And I also weigh the same as a lot of my friends who are taller than me. And that doesn't mean that I need to lose weight or that I need to be ashamed of my body whatsoever. It just means that that's the weight that I am, and that's how my body is. Different body proportions, different types of people. I think we also need to factor in like how people's bodies are different in terms of like their actual proportions. For example, like if someone like me had smaller boobs than me, they would weigh less than me. That again, it doesn't mean that I am at an unhealthy weight for my height. I have like literally my body is like 70% legs at least. Like I'm not even kidding. Like I'll stand, like look at me sitting down right now. I look like really short, and then when I stand up, I'm like God, because my height is all legs, and it's to the point where if I sit down for a long time and I stand up, I get lightheaded because my blood rushes down from my head, and I'm so tall. It's like walking on stilts. So my legs are probably a contributing factor to my weight as well, because legs hold a lot of weight and muscle, and my body is literally all legs. So these are like the little things to consider. The other thing to consider is that when a rider is on a horse, especially when they're fit and they're balanced, it's not like the whole dead weight is just thumping around on the horse. If you're balanced and you're engaging your body and like using your muscle, you're not going to feel like a dead weight flopping around on the horse. But if you're unbalanced, it doesn't really matter if you don't weigh very much. It's going to be less comfortable for the horse to carry if it's not as balanced, and if it's more difficult for the horse to like reach equilibrium. But yeah, like I really hope that some people who are watching this are the types of people that were body shaming or that really heavily abided by this rule. And I hope that this has led some people to reconsidering how they frame this topic. Because again, this is not me saying that we should just be like, oh, screw all the horses, make them pack any weight no matter what, no matter if they're showing discomfort or not. No. But if we're talking about equine welfare is something that impacts every single horse regardless of how big or small their rider is. So if this is about equine welfare, the welfare discussion does not need to involve the weight of the rider or the gender of the rider or the ethnicity of the rider or the age of the rider or any of that, because it doesn't matter. Horses, regardless of the owner, if they don't get well cared for, if they're in pain, they're going to be experiencing poor welfare. So if the issue is welfare and that is what we're discussing, let's talk about that, because that has nothing to do with the specific weight. It has to do with how people care for their horses and how they listen to what their horse is telling them. It has absolutely nothing to do with weight. So thank you for listening to my TED Talk, and I hope that this gets around to the people who actually need to see it, because I'm always constantly amazed by how progressive and open-minded and kind and empathetic my following proves themselves to be. It's a very, very like progressive and diverse group of people that seem to be more considerate of others. And I'm very proud of that, because the amount of topics that we can cover on here with minimal heckling and minimal people being like little edgelords and just being cruel and unkind or taking issue with what's being said or feeling, I don't know, weird about it. It just seems that people are more open-minded. Like the people that are following me, open-minded, and I'm happy to hear that. I bet it's because I'm such a loudmouth that a lot of the closed-minded people are just like, oh, fuck that bitch. That's her again. Let's get out of here. I don't like that face. It's like the Drew Affalo laugh, except it's just my face. And they're like, ew, gross. Let's get out of here. But that's okay. But yeah, I'm always amazed by how people are, like how my followers are. So thank you guys. And I do hope that if anyone has been in the position where they may have weight or body shamed someone, that you kind of start to reconsider your stance, because there's a lot more that goes into like health, fitness, and general ability to do things than weight. And when we fixate on weight, not only does it mean that thin people are disproportionately presumed to be athletic and healthy, even when they might not be that, it means that people who are bigger are going to be criticized and have the spotlight brought on them more and have their weight fixated on more, even when it's not fair to do so, which it literally never is fair to do so, because it's none of your business how much someone weighs. So yeah, reconsider how we approach this topic, because if the issue is equine welfare, that is not something that is weight specific, regardless of the size of the horse. It's never going to be weight specific, because the horse could still be suffering even with a tiny, tiny little rider on them. So equine welfare, don't bring up weight. Until there's actually a study that actually like zeroes in on a number, a percentage exactly, no matter the fitness level, the height, the breed, the type, the skill level of rider, so on and so forth, until we can actually zero in on a number after we have accounted for all of those variables, there is no need to bring up weight, because it'll end up letting people who shouldn't be off the hook for having horses who are experiencing poor welfare, while holding people who are doing perfectly fine more accountable because of how they look. It's not fair. So welfare talks don't need to bring up weight. If the issue is saddle fit, the horse's ability to pack the rider that is on them, and like overall fitness and comfort level of the horse, those are things that you can bring up that are not weight specific. Because if the horse is uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable. It doesn't matter how much the rider weighs. You don't need to bring up the weight. So anyways, I think that this is just addressing the elephant in the room, which is people's fat phobia in the horse world. And it's really bad. The body shaming and the body image issues in the horse world are really, really bad. Horse people are way too comfortable judging each other solely based off of experience. It is embarrassing. It is shameful. It is an indicator of how bad and like how immoral some horse people are and how little they value other people's feelings, because it is such a pervasive issue. It needs to stop. Hold yourself more accountable, especially if you're talking to a large audience, especially if you're discussing sensitive topics like weight. hold yourself more accountable and be careful how you frame these topics, because you are inadvertently going to insult and hurt the feelings of a lot of people who follow you that might feel targeted by your words, whether or not it actually applies to them in practice. And you're also inviting a whole lot of followers who follow you for welfare stuff to go and then take that with them and start to use it to body police other people and believe that it's factual. So let's do better, guys. Let's do better. We already have like enough body shaming towards women and feminine presenting people outside of the horse world. We don't need to make it an echo chamber of fat shaming within the horse world. And yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's so unnecessary, and it doesn't help out horses because it's not providing the full picture. And I'm a big one for providing the full picture and trying to talk about stuff from different angles, because then it addresses more different types of backgrounds of people and horses, because there's a lot of variables. And I would say the biggest one to consider is just the fact that my biggest argument against weight being a huge contributor to soundness and comfort of horses is the racing industry, because of the fact that like the jockeys and general people that are riding them are usually well within the 20% rule, if not like half of that. And we still see a huge instance of back issues and lameness issues in those horses, even when compared to other horses started at the same age. And the racing industry is such a gigantic sample size that like you can pretty comfortably look at that and go, this is odd. So again, obviously, even with that, there's a lot of variables, because there's like the drugging, like how the horses are trained, who's riding them, and so on and so forth. But yeah, generally speaking, there's just not enough out there for us to set rules to weight police other riders. So let's not do that. And yeah, anyone interested in contributing to the blog post that I want to write, just email me or DM me. And hopefully this gets around to the right people. If you know someone who has been doing this and has been weight shaming other people, feel free to send them the link to this. I'm going to leave it up. I think it's an important topic. I doubt anyone is going to watch this whole thing, because we're now at like an hour and a half. But hopefully it gets around to the people who see it, who need to see it, and hopefully it brings some change, because there's literally no point in having a platform if it's not going to be used to try to at least make the world better in some capacity. And we don't make the world a better place by being fatphobic. That is literally how you make it worse. And it's also perpetuating internalized misogyny, which we do not need, because women get their bodies policed enough as it is. We don't need to do that in like one of the most, like the largest female fronted sports. Like there's so many women in the horse industry. There's more than any other gender, as far as I know, unless the statistics have changed. So let's not perpetuate the idea that it's more okay to body police women and judge their weight than it is anyone else, because like we don't need that shit. We already get judged enough. We don't need that. Anyways, thank you for listening. Please no one make fun of my messy room. It's messy, but I know where stuff is. Okay, I do laundry a lot. When you work in a barn, it sucks. Your clothes are always dirty. So yeah. And I'm just messy, so I don't really feel the need to tidy up my shit before doing these things, because it's more important just to talk about the subject at hand. But last time on TikTok, someone got really butthurt about my mirror being dirty, so just a disclaimer, sorry. Anyways, yeah, so that my voice is going now because I've been talking for so long, so I'm going to end this, but I'm going to leave it up, so for anyone who missed the beginning, you can watch it then. And yeah, please do send this to anyone that you think needs to hear this, because I do think people need to consider more problems that are outside of what they immediately experience. And you can only do that by listening to other people's struggles and actually putting yourself in their shoes and considering how they feel about things. And I'm not saying that one of my struggles is being like fat shamed or weight shamed by people, because I wouldn't be within a demographic or like a body type that is most likely to have that happen. Even though I have had it happen to a lesser extent, it's not a problem that I experience to a large degree. But I've spent a lot of time talking to people who do. And because of that, I can't just sit here and listen to people perpetuate the very mindset that negatively impacts all of these people that I care about and respect and enjoy as horse people, and many of which exemplify like superior horse care to the vast majority of the horse world. So I want to use my platform to stand up for those types of people, even though this is not something that is a pressing issue for me personally experiencing in terms of me being targeted. And like everyone should care about that. If you only care about stuff that impacts you, you are very selfish. And that's something you might want to sit with and reconsider. You should care about other people feeling shitty, especially if it's something that you can easily change. So to anyone listening to this, if you've ever felt bad about your weight or someone has made you feel shitty about your body type, go like this to them and just like be like, fuck you. And void their opinion. Because anyone who zeroes in on your body type and how you look as like a main judgment on you they suck. They suck. They're not who you want to surround yourself with. Surround yourself with quality people who aren't going to be that judgmental. And just recognize the fact that everyone has a different body and your body is beautiful. If you have a body, you've got an equestrian body, you've got a beach body. You're perfect the way you are. Don't let other people ruin your perception of yourself because you know who you are. And especially with people who own own their own horses. Like you are there for the day-to-day for your horse, looking into their care. You have the capacity to check with your vet, like make sure their saddle fits and like watch out for back soreness or any signs of pain. So if you are doing that and you know that your horse is okay, don't listen to some a-hole on the internet who just looks at your body and goes, oh, your horse must not be comfortable. Because a lot of these a-holes have horses who are exemplifying instances of discomfort, even if the person is a tiny little teeny bopper who weighs 9 pounds. You can still hurt your horse. So let's not let these people off the hook, and also don't hold yourself more accountable than what you need to, because again, like fitness has nothing to do with how your body presents just from people looking at face value. That doesn't define how athletic you are, how fit you are, how healthy you are. It doesn't. It's flawed. It's a flawed system. We've acknowledged that many a time now in the modern world, but it still is not being listened to enough in practice, especially in industries like the horse world, where it's so body shamey and body policey and very like status based and tradition based. But yeah, don't let other people make you feel like garbage, and just you do you. And let's try to make the world a better place and try to improve equine welfare without making it something that's specific to someone's weight, gender, height, race, etc., because that has nothing to do with it. So anyways, thank you for listening, everyone, and I hope everyone has a nice evening, and that hopefully we start to move towards a place where the horse world will be less judgmental about stupid stuff and more judgmental about the stuff that matters, like the basic management practices that we've normalized as being fine, and a lot of the equipment that we still allow to be used at a rampant rate. Let's start there. So yeah, thanks for listening, everyone, and please feel free to send this to people who need to hear it, because I am tired of this. I've been going on a tear about this all day because it pisses me off so much. So I'm sure you can see that here. Anyways, have a good day, everyone, and I hope you're all feeling happy and well and just doing well. So good night. See you later. And if you want to see what I'm talking about on TikTok, if you have TikTok, just go to my page because I've responded to some of the stuff, and also you can see some of the accounts that have contributed to this. If you don't have TikTok, don't do it. It's not that important. And it'll just piss you off probably. So yeah, anyways, have a great night, everyone. And if you want to watch the beginning of this, if you missed it, I'm going to save this so you can rewind it. Anyways, peace.